Picture a bedroom, clean, quiet, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. Now fill it with the smell of laudanum and lavender water and something darker underneath both of those. Something iron and animal and deeply, inconveniently human. Add a woman lying perfectly still in a perfectly pressed nightgown on perfectly laundered sheets, and a doctor standing over her with a leather bag and an expression of total scientific confidence, and a husband hovering in the doorway looking like he genuinely cannot decide if he is worried or inconvenienced. And the answer, if you watched him long enough, would be mostly the second one. That's 1878, London. A respectable household in Bloomsbury, 4 streets from the British Museum, 2 streets from a park with a fountain that works most of the time. A city where you could attend a lecture on the theory of natural selection in the morning and be told by a licensed physician in the afternoon that your uterus was directly causing your bad mood. A city where women wore corsets so tight they rearranged their internal organs, took opium for breakfast, and were medically advised to avoid reading novels during the second week of every single month. A city of extraordinary, world-altering ideas, most of them produced by men who had never once had to think about what was happening inside their own bodies on any given Tuesday. We're going back there tonight, not as visitors, not as researchers peering through glass at a curious historical exhibit. We're living it. One cycle, one woman, every cramp and condescension and dark, wet afternoon and opium dream she would have moved through, survived, and never once been allowed to name out loud in polite company. I make these history stories, and I genuinely do not know if you're listening to this because you find Victorian medicine fascinating, or because you have cramps right now and you want to feel better about your situation by comparison, or because you're just someone who likes falling asleep to the sound of a man talking about things that happen before electricity. All of those are completely valid. Subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness, but not complete darkness. Not the thick country dark you remember from childhood. This is London dark, which is its own specific thing. There are always lights somewhere, even at 4 a.m, always a gas lamp bleeding orange through the gap in the curtains, always the particular amber glow of a city that never manages to go fully to sleep no matter how hard the respectable parts of it try. You're in your bed. Your own bed, in your own bedroom, in the house on Montague Street that you've lived in for 3 years, that you know intimately, that you could walk through blindfolded, and yet this particular morning it takes you 2 full seconds to remember where you are. 2 seconds of nothing, and then everything arrives at once. The smell is the first thing. Rooms like yours are supposed to smell like nothing. That's the ideal. Clean linen, faint lavender from the drawer sachets, the very faint suggestion of beeswax from the polished furniture. Nothing offensive, nothing animal. A room that contains a woman without being contaminated by the fact of her. But this morning the room smells different. There's the lavender, yes, and under it the faint coal smoke ghost that works its way into every room in London. Regardless of how many times you clean the curtains, there's something else. Something you recognize in the way you recognize something you've been trained not to name. Iron, salt. The specific heavy warmth of your own body becoming something slightly other than usual. Your lower back is the next thing. It doesn't hurt yet, not precisely, but there is a pressure there. Low and slow and purposeful. The kind of pressure that means something is preparing itself. You've felt this before. You feel it every month, beginning about here beginning with exactly this particular quality of warning. And by now, you know what it means the way you know what a change in the wind means if you grew up near the sea. You're 24 years old. You've been feeling this particular warning every month since you were 14. That's 10 years of this exact sensation, this specific tightening, this slow gathering interior announcement that the next 4 to 7 days will require a particular kind of management that nobody in your household is going to discuss openly, that your husband will refer to only as you being unwell, that your doctor will name in Latin with the satisfied expression of a man who has successfully converted inconvenient biology into professional vocabulary. You lie still for a moment. The house is quiet around you. It's early. The clock on the mantelpiece says 6:05, though you're not entirely certain when you last wound it. Outside, the street is starting its morning process. You can hear the first carter on the cobblestones, the slow, heavy weight of a horse and cart making its way through the quiet, and further off, the unmistakable clatter of the milk delivery, bottles jostling in their rack. You should get up. You know this. Getting up is what respectable women do at 6 in the morning. Getting up is the correct and appropriate response to a new day. But you lie still for another moment, one hand flat against your lower abdomen, feeling the pressure there, just getting a sense of what you're working with, just taking stock. You do this privately, this small assessment, this brief negotiation between your body and your day, and you've learnt to do it quickly because there's something about lying in bed with your hand on your belly and your eyes on the ceiling that makes you feel not sick exactly, not invalid, but visible in a way you're not supposed to be. Like you're too aware of the fact that you have a body and what it does, and that this is happening inside it whether or not anyone gives it permission. The ceiling is plain white plaster. You know every inch of it. There's a hairline crack near the window that's been there since the first winter, and which your husband has been meaning to have seen to since the first winter, and which will still be there, you are fairly certain, when you're both old. You get up. The floor is cold. Not the brutal cold of December or January. This is October, so it's the particular chill of an English autumn morning, the kind of cold that's not quite cold enough to be properly cold, but is absolutely cold enough to be unpleasant under bare feet. Your feet find the small rug beside the bed, the one with the blue border that was a wedding gift from your mother, and which has faded from the particular shade of blue that your mother called sapphire to something closer to slate. And then you're standing, and the pressure in your lower back shifts slightly, redistributes, becomes more specific. Yes, definitely. You were right to take stock. The dressing table is across the room. 12 steps. You know this exactly, though you've never counted it consciously. Your body knows the room the way it knows itself, by feel, by habit, by the accumulated information of 3 years of moving through this space in every state of mind and body it's possible to be in. The mirror shows you your face in the early morning light that's beginning to come through the curtain gap. You look like yourself, a little pale. There are shadows under your eyes that weren't there last week, or maybe they were, and you simply chose not to look at them. Your hair is loose around your shoulders in the way it can only be when you're alone, when there's no one to see the undressed version of you, the version that hasn't been organised and structured and arranged into the public form of Mrs. James Hartley of Montague Street, Bloomsbury. You look at yourself for a moment, just a moment. Then you begin the process of becoming the dressed version, the corset first. This is not a simple operation. The laces at the back need to be done up by someone else, which means you'll need to ring for Annie. Annie being your housemaid, 16 years old, from Southwark, with red hands and a slightly anxious disposition, and an absolute gift for keeping her expression entirely neutral in every situation you've ever seen her in, which you respect enormously. But first, before Annie arrives, there are the bones of the thing to deal with. The rigid boning at the front, the steel busk that runs the length of your torso. You hook it from the bottom up, fastening each hook with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. And as you do, as you feel the structure closing around you, the thing that you'd been negotiating with for the past 10 minutes, the low pressure, the slow gathering, shifts, tightens slightly, not dramatically, not in a way you could describe to anyone who would know what you were talking about, but the corset changes the geometry of your interior, pushes things inward and upward, and your uterus, which has been sitting quietly getting ready for the next few days, registers this rearrangement with what you can only describe as opinion. You breathe carefully, small breaths, managed breaths, the kind of breathing you've been doing for 10 years whenever you need to not show your face. Then you ring for Annie, and Annie comes, and Annie laces you up with her usual competent silence, and you say nothing and she says nothing, and the room remains perfectly correct, and there is no conversation about what you can feel building in your lower body or what the next several days are going to require of you or of her or of anyone in this house. That's how it's done. Let me tell you about 1878, because this particular year is important, not because anything dramatic happened in it. 1878 is not one of those years that history has seen fit to make famous. Queen Victoria is on the throne and has been for 41 years and will be for another 23. The empire covers a quarter of the land surface of the earth. London has a population of 3.5 million people, which makes it the largest city on the planet, and it is noisy and filthy and magnificent in the way that only a city of 3.5 million people in the Victorian era can be, which is to say it is magnificent in the way that a thing that will kill you is sometimes magnificent. But 1878 is important for this story because it is right in the middle of something. It's right in the middle of the period when medicine is changing, when it's beginning to call itself a science, when it's starting to develop tools and theories and professional structures that will eventually become the medicine you know. And it's also right in the middle of the period when none of those tools and theories have yet reached women's bodies, when the gap between what medicine claims it knows and what medicine actually knows is widest precisely in the area of female physiology. Doctors in 1878 know quite a lot about cholera. They know quite a lot about infectious disease, about surgery, about bones and muscles and the mechanics of the heart. They know almost nothing, and what they think they know is almost entirely wrong, about what happens inside a woman's body every month. What they think they know is this: that menstruation is a pathological process, not a normal biological function, a disorder, something that happens to women because of a fundamental instability in the female constitution. They know, or rather they believe, with the absolute conviction of men who have read books written by other men who also believed it, that the uterus and the ovaries are directly connected to the nervous system, and that when those organs are doing whatever they do, the nervous system is compromised. And when the nervous system is compromised, the woman is temporarily, their word is alienated, temporarily alienated from her reason. There is a word for this. Several words, actually. The one they use most often is hysteria, from the Greek, from the word for uterus, the womb disease. The wandering organ theory goes back to ancient Greece. The idea that the uterus was not fixed in place but could move around the body, causing different symptoms depending on where it wandered. And while no serious physician in 1878 actually still believes in the literal wandering womb, the conceptual ghost of it has never quite left the medical literature. The uterus remains, in the medical imagination of 1878, a suspicious organ, an unstable one that requires management, and the symptoms of the days before your period, the cramping, the back pain, the bloating, the shifting moods, the headaches, the exhaustion, the particular way that certain things which are bearable on ordinary days become not quite bearable. Those symptoms do not have a name yet. The term premenstrual tension won't be coined for another 53 years. What you have instead is hysteria, nervous collapse, female neurasthenia, uterine irritability, depending on which doctor you're seeing and what year it is and how recently he has read a journal. You might get any number of these diagnoses, each of them meaning approximately the same thing, which is your body is doing something that is interfering with your ability to function normally. And the reason for this is that you are a woman, and the treatment is a combination of rest and chemicals, and limiting the demands you make on your overtaxed feminine system. This is the world you're living in. Not a cruel world on the surface. Your doctor is not a villain. He is a well-educated, genuinely well-meaning man who went to one of the best medical schools in the country and has read the best medical literature of his era and is offering you the best treatment that 1878 has to offer. The problem is not that he is malicious. The problem is that the best treatment 1878 has to offer for the thing your body is doing is almost entirely useless, occasionally actively harmful, and structured around the deeply comfortable assumption that the suffering is the patient's fault for having the wrong kind of body. Anyway, breakfast. Breakfast happens at 8 o'clock in the Hartley household, at a table that seats 8 and currently seats 2, you and James, who works in the city and leaves the house by 9 every morning, and returns by 6 every evening, and occupies the house in the same way that a pleasant, busy, fundamentally preoccupied man occupies a house, which is to say he is present, but also in some essential way slightly absent, even when he's sitting directly across from you. James Hartley's 30 years old. He has dark hair that he parts on the left, and mutton chop whiskers that he is very slightly too young for. He reads the Times over breakfast. He eats toast and a soft-boiled egg. He drinks his coffee strong. This morning he looks at you over the edge of the paper. "You're pale," he says. It's an observation, not quite a question, somewhere between the two. "I'm well," you say. He goes back to his paper, 2 lines down. "That time again, is it?" The way he says "that time," with the specific delicacy of a man who has been told that a certain topic is not for the breakfast table, and who has entirely taken this instruction on board, while also being unable to not mention it at the breakfast table, makes something in your jaw tighten. "I'm perfectly well," you say again. "I'll send for Blackwood," he says, meaning your doctor, Dr. Francis Blackwood of Harley Street, who charges 2 guineas a visit, and who has been treating your indispositions with the same prescription for the past 3 years. "There's no need," you say. "Blackwood should know," James says, and he refolds his paper, and that, apparently, is that. This is the texture of it. Not dramatic, not violent, not even, technically, unkind. James is not a bad husband. He is a husband of his time and class and education, which means he is a husband who has absorbed, fully and without examination, the medical and social consensus that women's monthly complaints are medical events requiring medical management, and who therefore processes the fact of your discomfort as primarily an administrative matter, something to be delegated to the appropriate professional, rather than as a thing happening to a person he is fond of who might benefit from a different kind of attention. You eat your toast. The toast is a little cold because Annie made it at exactly 8 o'clock, and it's now 8 minutes past because you were slightly slow getting downstairs, the back pressure slowing you imperceptibly. Cold toast is one of those small, specific griefs of Victorian domestic life that nobody has ever written a poem about. The butter sits on top of it rather than melting into it. You eat it anyway. Outside the window, Montague Street is doing its morning things. A woman with a basket is walking quickly past. A dog is investigating something in the gutter. The smell of horse comes in through the small gap at the bottom of the window, mixing with the coal smoke smell that is basically the ambient air of this city. You've lived in London for 3 years, and you don't notice the coal smell anymore except on mornings like this one, when you're noticing everything a little too precisely. The pressure in your lower back speaks to you again. You take a slow breath. You finish your toast. James folds his paper, kisses your forehead. He does this every morning, a quick, practiced thing, not unaffectionate, and goes to get his coat and hat. He'll send a note to Blackwood from his office. He's decided this. The matter of your monthly disturbance has been placed in the appropriate professional hands, and he can now go deal with the things that are his actual responsibility, which is to say the things that happen in the city and involve money. The door closes. The house settles into its quieter daytime self. You sit for a moment at the breakfast table, one hand under the cloth, pressed flat against your lower abdomen, just taking stock again. Annie clears the breakfast things. She moves around you with the practiced invisibility of a good housemaid, appearing and disappearing, plates vanishing, cups disappearing, and she does not look at you directly, and you do not look at her directly, and the room maintains its polite fiction of normalcy. But you watch her hands as she clears. They're rough, Annie's hands. The skin is red and cracked at the knuckles from the washing. She's 16 years old, and her hands already look like a woman's hands, a working woman's hands, the kind that get used and used and used without pause. You've never asked Annie what her monthly disturbances are like. It's not a thing that's asked, not in this direction, not by a woman like you to a girl like her. But you're thinking about it this morning, as the pressure in your back settles into something more deliberate, and your body begins, quietly, and without any interest in your schedule, its monthly announcement. You wonder if Annie's are as bad as yours. You wonder what she does about them. You know she can't stop, can't lie in a darkened room, can't have the doctor sent for. The world doesn't stop for Annie's body the way it's about to stop for yours. She disappears through the door with the breakfast tray, and you're alone, and the house is very quiet, and outside the window London makes its usual noise, and inside your body something is beginning that you've been through 47 times before, and that you will go through, if you're lucky and stay healthy, several hundred more. Let me tell you what the medical literature of 1878 says about you. There are journal articles, there are textbooks, there is a thriving body of professional writing about the female reproductive system and its effects on female psychology, and if you were to go to a medical library, which you are not permitted to do, because medical libraries in 1878 are not for women, they are for doctors who are not women. And if you were to read through that literature, here is what you would find. You would find that menstruation is described repeatedly and with remarkable confidence as a crisis, a monthly crisis of the female nervous system. You would find that the brain and the uterus are described as being in a state of permanent competition for the body's vital resources, specifically for blood, and that when the uterus is actively engaged in its monthly work, it draws blood and energy away from the brain, leaving the female intellect temporarily enfeebled. You would find that this enfeebling is considered not a description of pain and exhaustion, but an actual measurable cognitive deficit. Women during their menstrual periods are considered, by the medical establishment of 1878, to be temporarily incapable of certain types of thought. Not all thought, but certainly rational, sustained, demanding thought. Certainly the kind of thought required for study or professional work or managing complex affairs. You would find that this is used as an argument against women's education, against women's suffrage, against women in any position that requires thinking on a monthly basis. A Harvard physician named Edward Clark has recently written a book, published in 1873, just 5 years ago, called Sex in Education, in which he argues, with what he presents as scientific rigour, that educating women at the university level is physically dangerous to them, that the demands of study during the menstrual period damage the reproductive organs, that educated women suffer more from menstrual disorders than uneducated ones, and therefore education is making women sick. The book is enormously popular. It goes through 17 editions. You may own a copy. Your husband has probably read it. Your doctor has definitely read it. You would find, in the medical literature, a word for the emotional symptoms of the days before your period. They don't call it premenstrual. They don't have that framework. They call it menstrual madness. Or they call it cyclical insanity. There are case reports, earnest, detailed, well-meaning case reports written by doctors who genuinely believe they are helping, of women who are committed to asylums for behaviour that today we would recognise as severe PMS. Women who became angry or weepy or unmanageable, or who said things they would not normally say or did things their families considered alarming at the same point in every cycle. And those women were studied and documented and in some cases institutionalized, because the medical consensus was that the behaviour was evidence of a real mental disturbance triggered by the uterus, and that left untreated it would progress to what was never entirely clear. But progress, and that was enough. You would find prescriptions, list of treatments. The treatments vary by severity and physician preference, but they cluster around certain options. Rest is universal. Absolute rest in a darkened room, avoiding all stimulation and exertion. Diet is discussed. Light foods, easily digested, no alcohol, no stimulating food such as meat taken in excess. Hydrotherapy is mentioned, cold water applied to the lower abdomen, or baths at specific temperatures. And then, for the more acute cases, the ones with severe cramping or emotional instability, there are the drugs. Laudanum first, always laudanum. Laudanum is what you'd call a tincture of opium. Opium dissolved in alcohol, so you're getting both the opium and the alcohol together in a dark glass bottle with a handsome label. It tastes of alcohol and something slightly bitter and something slightly sweet underneath that. And it takes about 20 minutes to begin working, and when it works like this. Everything becomes slightly further away. The cramping doesn't stop exactly, but it's as if someone has installed a layer of cotton wool between you and the sensation. The edges go soft. The quality of the light in the room shifts. Your thoughts become wide and slow, like water moving in a deep river rather than a shallow one. less urgent, less sequential, and you feel, underneath all of that, a spreading warmth, a generalized willingness, a dissolution of the particular sharp-edged quality of pain. That's the laudanum. And laudanum is the treatment. Laudanum is what Dr. Blackwood prescribes for your indispositions. He's been prescribing it for 3 years, the same dosage, adjusted occasionally if the cramps are worse than usual. He considers this good, responsible medicine. He's right that it addresses the pain. He's wrong about almost everything else. After laudanum, there's cannabis tincture. Yes, cannabis, available from any decent pharmacy in 1878, prescribed for menstrual cramping with some regularity, dissolved in alcohol, tasting of something green and medicinal and slightly earthy. There's chloral hydrate for sleep. There's bromide of potassium for what doctors call nervous excitement, meaning emotional instability, meaning the symptoms you'd now recognize as mood changes associated with PMS. And for the worst cases, the ones that don't respond to drugs alone, there are procedures, surgical procedures. The surgical removal of the ovaries, oophorectomy, was performed in England and America from the 1870s, onward specifically as a treatment for nervous disorders in women. The idea was that if the ovaries were causing the problem, removing the ovaries would solve it. Thousands of women had this surgery. Many of them died of it. The ones who survived were cured, in the specific sense that removing your ovaries does indeed stop menstruation. It also stops any possibility of pregnancy, throws the body into surgical menopause, and has a variety of other effects that no one in 1878 was particularly keeping track of. You don't know about any of this, not the full picture. You know about laudanum because Blackwood has prescribed it. You know, in a general way, that your symptoms are medical, that there is a clinical category into which you fit, a language of disease that contains you. You've been told you have uterine irritability. You've been told this is not uncommon in women of nervous temperament. You've been told that the best thing for it is rest and medical management, and not taxing your system unnecessarily. What you haven't been told is that any of this is questionable, that the theory behind it is not what science looks like, but what male authority looks like when it puts on the costume of science. You haven't been told that what you're experiencing, the pain, the mood changes, the exhaustion, is a normal variation in a normal biological process that the right century would eventually understand, and that your own body is not in fact broken. Nobody has told you this because nobody knows it yet. The doctors are wrong, but they're not lying. That's the particular texture of 1878. Nobody is lying, everyone is wrong. Anyway, the morning, you go to the parlour. This is what you do on ordinary mornings, on the mornings before the pressure has declared itself too firmly to be ignored. You sit in the parlour, and you do the things that a woman of your station does in the morning. There are letters to write. You've been corresponding with your sister in Leeds about the question of whether she should accept a certain social invitation, and you've been meaning to write back for 3 days. And this morning you sit at the writing desk and you take out paper and you begin. Your sister's name is Margaret. She's 26, 2 years older than you, and she has 2 children and a husband who travels a great deal, and a very complicated relationship with their mutual circle of acquaintances in Leeds, which produces a constant flow of correspondence. You love Margaret. You find her letters exhausting. Both things are true. You write, "Dearest Meg, I have been meaning to write since Tuesday, but have not had the chance until today. You should accept Mrs. Parkinson's invitation. The alternative is spending the entire evening being questioned by Mama about why you didn't, and the first option seems considerably less painful, and here you stop. Because painful is not quite the word you want, given that pain is the precise thing you are managing this morning, quietly, under the surface of your competent handwriting. You cross it out and write, considerably more agreeable, which says the same thing but doesn't reach. The pressure is getting more insistent, not unbearable, not even close to unbearable, not yet, but present in a way that requires management. You shift in your chair. You adjust the position of your lower spine against the chair back. You take a breath. The writing desk faces the window. Through the window you can see a small section of the street and a larger section of the sky, which is the particular white-grey of an October London morning. The clouds doing that thing they do where they're not quite rainy but they're not quite anything else either. Just committed to a general quality of diffused, even light that makes everything look very slightly like a pencil drawing of itself. You watch a pigeon on the windowsill across the street for a moment. It's doing something with a piece of something. Crust, possibly, or a piece of paper, turning it with one foot in the way pigeons do, which you've always found slightly unnerving. Your back speaks to you again. You put down your pen. Here is what you know about the next several days because you've done them before. The pain will come in waves, manageable at first, then less so, peaking somewhere around the second day, then beginning to ease. The back will ache continuously. The cramping will come and go, predictable in rhythm if not in intensity, peaking every hour or so. Your head will hurt, a low specific ache that sits behind your eyes and is affected by light. Your sleep will be difficult, and then, once the worst of the first day has passed, it will be heavy and strange, the kind of sleep that feels thick when you're in it, but not restful when you come out of it. Your mood will... This is the thing they're most interested in, the doctors. The thing that gets the most ink in the medical literature. Your mood in the days before and the first days of your period is something you've spent significant energy managing and concealing and presenting in a socially acceptable form, because the alternative is a conversation you've had before and don't want to have again. It's not madness. You want to be very clear about that, even just to yourself. Even inside the privacy of your own skull, it is not madness. It is a heightening, a thinning of the usual protective layer between you and everything. On ordinary days, the small frictions of your life, the way James reads the paper at breakfast without speaking, the way a certain neighbour visits and talks about her own life for 40 minutes without once inquiring about yours, the way your position in this house is simultaneously everything, and also somehow not quite enough for everything that's in you. Those things are manageable. They have the quality of background noise. In the days before your period, they have the quality of close proximity. They don't become terrible. They become legible. The frustration is still proportionate, actually. It's proportionate to the things that are frustrating. It's just that you can feel the proportion directly rather than through the usual insulation. You've never said this to Blackwood. You've never said anything like this to Blackwood. When Blackwood arrives, which will be today because James has already decided to send for him, you will say, "My monthly indisposition has begun and I have some cramping and back pain," and he will nod and take your pulse and look at your tongue and press on your abdomen through several layers of clothing and corset, and decide what dosage of laudanum to prescribe. And the other thing, the heightening, the thinning of insulation, the sudden legibility of all the distances, that will not come up at all. The morning moves forward. Annie brings tea at 11. You drink it slowly. You've moved from the writing desk to the low chair by the fire, which is slightly easier on your back. The fire is lit because October, and it makes the room smell of coal and warmth and the specific domesticity of a room that's been lived in and maintained and tended. Margaret's letter sits unfinished on the writing desk. You'll finish it later. Maybe. The doorbell rings at 11:30. Dr. Francis Blackwood of Harley Street is 52 years old, a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, the author of 2 textbooks on female nervous disorders, and a man who wears a gold watch chain across a considerable waistcoat, and who has the particular manner of the kind of doctor who is never uncertain, not because he is never in a situation where uncertainty would be appropriate, but because uncertainty is something he decided some time ago not to have. He comes in with his leather bag. He comes in with the good professional warmth that he turns on in front of patients. Not cold, not dismissive, genuinely warm. The warmth of a man who does care about his patients, and who expresses this caring in the specific language that 1878 provides to him, which is the language of benevolent authority over a body that is not performing correctly. "Mrs. Hartley," he says. Mr. Hartley was concerned. "I'm quite all right," you say. "You look a little pale." He sits in the chair across from you without being invited to, which is simply what doctors do. "The indisposition has begun?" "This morning," you say. "And how is the pain?" "Moderate." This is calibrated. Moderate is the word that gets you through the consultation without either underprescribing or the alarmed escalation that comes with severe. You've learned, over 3 years, how to describe your symptoms in a way that gets you the laudanum dosage that actually helps, without triggering the next level of intervention, which is bed rest so complete that you're not allowed to rise even for meals. Blackwood opens his bag. He asks the usual questions. Pulse, which he takes with 2 fingers at your wrist, frowning at his watch. Tongue, which he examines by holding a small lamp near your face. Abdomen, which he presses on briefly through the reinforced wall of your corset, achieving basically nothing diagnostically, but maintaining the form of a physical examination. "The nervous system is clearly engaged," he says, putting his instruments away. "The uterine irritability is pronounced this month, I'd say, possibly related to the weather. I've found that the autumnal change can exacerbate the condition." "The weather," you say. "The damp particularly." Cold and damp are significant factors in female nervous complaints. "Have you been outdoors much this past week?" "Some walks," you say. "In the park?" He makes a small, disapproving sound. Not dramatic. Just a sound that communicates. The walks in the park were probably not wise. "Rest," he says. "Absolute rest is essential. No going out, no social engagements for the next several days, no strenuous mental activity, no novel reading if you can help it. The nervous system needs complete quiet." He opens his prescription book, writes, blots. "I'm prescribing a somewhat higher dosage this month," he says, "given that the weather has exacerbated things. Take it in half-drachm doses, morning and evening. If the cramping is severe, you may take a 3rd dose at midday, but don't exceed that." He tears out the prescription and gives it to you. Laudanum. You can read the words. Tinctura opii. Half a fluid drachm twice daily. The dosage that means you'll be functional but softened. The dosage that takes the edge off everything, the physical pain and the other thing, the heightened clarity, the legibility of all the distances. All of it softened. All of it moved slightly further away. "I'll look in again on Thursday," he says, standing. "If things worsen, have Mr. Hartley send word immediately." He says this to you, but he means it to James. If things worsen, have your husband notify your doctor. Your husband is the one who will assess whether things have worsened sufficiently to warrant contact. You are not the primary decision-maker regarding your own medical situation. Your husband is the intermediary between you and your doctor, because you are unwell, and when you are unwell, you are temporarily not the most reliable reporter on your own condition. This is the system. You live in the system. You've always lived in the system. The fish doesn't notice the water. Blackwood leaves. You hear him in the hall with Annie for a moment, giving instructions probably about your care for the next few days. What you should and shouldn't eat, when to call him. Annie will receive these instructions and carry them out with her usual competent silence and slightly anxious efficiency. You sit by the fire and hold the prescription in both hands and look at it. Half a fluid drachm of laudanum, morning and evening. You know what this means for the next 4 days. You've been here before. The pharmacy is 2 streets away. Annie will go. She'll come back with a small dark glass bottle, already labelled in the pharmacist's neat hand, and you'll take the first dose sometime this afternoon, and by evening the cotton wool will have installed itself between you and your body, and you'll sleep, and tomorrow will be softer, and the day after that softer still, and by the end of the week the pain will be tapering, and the laudanum will be tapering, and you'll come back to yourself, the usual self, the insulated self, the self that manages gradually, like a ship coming into harbour after a long passage, relieved and slightly disoriented. But right now it's still this morning. The pain is still clear. The house is still quiet around you. The fire crackles. The pigeon, across the street, is still working on its crust. You put the prescription in your pocket. You go to the window and look out at the street for a moment. There's a woman on the pavement across the way. She's carrying a large basket, the kind the laundry workers use, and she's moving quickly. Not quite running, but the walk of someone who has too much to do and too little time to do it in. Her dress is plain and dark and practical. Her arms, where they're visible below her rolled-up sleeves, are reddened from work. She's young, your age, maybe younger. She doesn't look up at the sky, doesn't look at the pigeons or the street or the elegant facades of the houses. She's just moving through the morning with the particular forward momentum of someone who cannot stop. You watch her until she passes out of the window's frame. She doesn't get to lie down. Whatever her body is doing this month, whatever the pressure at the base of her spine is telling her on this particular October morning, she doesn't get the darkened room and the prescription and the absolute rest. She has laundry. She has the basket. She has whatever comes after the basket. Her body does what it does, same as yours, inside the continuous motion of her working day, and no doctor is going to send for her, and no one is going to prescribe her anything, and the work is going to get done because the work is always going to get done. And on one hand, you know that what you have, the darkened room, and the doctor, and the laudanum, is a privilege, a particular, specific privilege of your class. The prescription is expensive. The doctor is expensive. The ability to not work for 4 days is expensive. You can afford to be unwell because you have a husband who earns, and a house that's managed by staff who manage it without you when you're indisposed. And on the other hand, you're aware that the room you're about to lie down in, the bottles of laudanum you're about to take, the treatment you're about to receive, none of it is actually good for you. The laudanum blunts the pain, yes, but it also blunts you. It takes the edges off the pain, and the edges off the clarity, and the edges off everything. and it leaves you floating in a slightly removed, slightly narrated version of yourself, and you'll spend 4 days in that version, and then you'll come back, and then in 3 weeks you'll do it again. The laundry woman with the basket who gets no treatment. She moves through her pain and out the other side of it, under her own power. There's something about that. Something you can't quite name. Something that sits in the vicinity of envy, though it's not exactly envy, because the pain is real and you wouldn't want hers any more than you want your own. It's more like the treatment they give you for not being able to function is itself a way of not functioning. You're going to spend 4 days in a medical fog, approved, prescribed, administered with professional confidence, and at the end of it you'll have rested, but you won't have moved through anything. You'll have been managed. The fire pops. You turn away from the window. Annie is in the doorway. "Shall I fetch the prescription, Mum?" "Yes," you say. "Please." She goes. The house settles around you again. You lower yourself into the fireside chair, carefully, slowly, because the cramping has shifted from background to foreground in the last half hour, and your body now has definite opinions about how quickly it wants to move. You're 24 years old. This will happen every month for the next several decades, assuming your health holds. Assuming the treatments don't do something worse, which you don't think about because thinking about it is not going to help you. And anyway, you trust Blackwood, the way you've been raised to trust Blackwood, the way women of your time and class are raised to trust the medical authority that manages them. Outside, London continues its enormous indifferent roar. 3.5 million people moving through their morning. The coal smoke rising from 3.5 million chimneys, the horses on the cobblestones, the watermen on the river, the merchants at their counters, the laundry women with their baskets, the factory girls at their machines, the servants in the great houses, all of them moving, all of them working, all of them managing whatever their bodies are doing this particular morning. And you, in your parlour in Bloomsbury, by your fire, with your prescription on its way, doing the very particular management that your class requires of you, waiting. The laudanum arrives at 1:30. Annie brings it on a small tray, which is how everything in this house is brought, on a tray, because that's the correct presentation. The bottle is dark amber glass with a white label in the pharmacist's neat copper plate. Tinctura opii, the directions, Blackwood's name at the bottom, the pharmacist's name, everything very official, everything very correct. You pour the first dose yourself into the small glass measure that lives in the medicine cabinet in your dressing room, and which is sized exactly for this purpose. Half a fluid drachm, just over the first line on the side of the glass. The laudanum is dark reddish-brown, the colour of old wood or strong tea, and it smells of alcohol first and something else beneath that, something bitter, something that your body recognises before your mind does. You've been taking this for 3 years. Your body knows this smell. It anticipates. You drink it in one motion, because there's no pleasant way to take it slowly. It tastes of alcohol and the bitterness and something else, something almost sweet, and it goes down hot and then immediately starts the process of becoming something else, something that travels rather than arrives. Then there's the waiting. 20 minutes, roughly, before the first effects. You lie down. The bedroom is partly darkened, the curtains drawn against the afternoon light, which is already beginning to fade, October afternoons being what they are in London. The fire has been brought up in here as well, a small well-behaved fire in the grate that makes the room warm and makes the light that comes through the curtains amber rather than grey. The bed is good. You should say that. The bed is very good. A wide, deep mattress thing with clean sheets that Annie changes 3 times a week, and a feather coverlet and 2 good pillows and a bolster. This is what you rest on. This is the surface of your confinement. You lie on your back, hands flat at your sides, and look at the ceiling. The ceiling in here is the same plain white plaster as the parlour, but there's no hairline crack. This ceiling is perfect, uniform, unbroken. It's been more of a focus of your attention in the last 3 years than you expected when you first moved into this house. You know every inch of it. The back pain is a fact. The cramping is a fact. Both are present, both making themselves known with the steady insistence of something that has been very patient and has decided that patience is now done with. You breathe, small careful breaths. The corset has been removed. Annie helped you out of it when you came upstairs. Another small mercy of confinement. And your body, freed from its architecture, can feel the full texture of what's happening inside it. The cramping moves in waves, each wave beginning somewhere near the middle of your lower abdomen and radiating outward, into your back, into your thighs, a sensation that is both specific and diffuse, both very much exactly here and also everywhere at once. The first time you felt this, at 14, you thought you were dying. That's not hyperbole. That's what you thought. The women who were supposed to explain it to you, your mother, your governess, had explained it in the specific way that women of their generation explained female bodily functions, which is to say, in the most minimal possible terms, the terms that got the fact across while leaving the reality of the experience entirely to your imagination. You knew it would happen. You didn't know it would feel like this. You thought you were dying, and you said nothing because you'd been raised not to say anything, and you lay on your bed for 2 days and managed it and emerged the other side and understood that this was going to be your life now, on a monthly basis, forever. You were 14. Nobody told you it might get better with age, or with medical management, or with warmth, or with anything. Nobody told you anything useful at all. You just absorbed it. The way women absorb things, the way you're taught to absorb things, quietly in rooms that nobody's looking at. 20 minutes. You can feel the laudanum starting. It's subtle at first. The quality of the ceiling changes. Not the ceiling itself, obviously, but your relationship to it. There's a slight easing, a loosening of something. The pain doesn't stop. It never stops at this dosage. But it becomes something you're observing rather than something you're inside. A slight shift of perspective, as if you've taken one small step backward from yourself. Your hands relax on the coverlet. You didn't know they were tense. They often are. The fire makes small sounds. The street outside the window makes its continuous ambient noise. Horses, voices, the distant rumble of heavier traffic on the main road. London, present and ongoing and entirely indifferent to what's happening in your bedroom. Your eyes are heavy. You weren't going to sleep. It's only 2 in the afternoon, and you're not the sort of woman who sleeps in the afternoon on ordinary days. But the laudanum, combined with the warmth of the room, and the particular draining quality of the first real day of pain, is conspiring against wakefulness. You think about the laundry woman with the basket. Where is she now? On her 3rd delivery, probably. Somewhere in the city, moving, her arms reddened, her body doing whatever it's doing. You think about Margaret's letter, sitting unfinished on the writing desk downstairs. Poor Meg, waiting for advice about whether to accept an invitation to a dinner party in Leeds, while her sister lies in a darkened room in Bloomsbury, taking opium prescribed by a man who charges 2 guineas a visit. You think about James, in the city, surrounded by numbers, surrounded by the clean mechanisms of finance, in a world that doesn't have this particular quality of unpredictability, this monthly announcement from the interior, you think, what would it be like? What would it be like if none of this required management, if you just moved through it, the way the laundry woman moves through it? Not painlessly. You don't want to romanticize her situation. She's probably in considerable pain and has no access to any relief whatsoever. But without the management, without the system of management, what would it be like to feel what you feel and not have it immediately categorized and treated and softened? The laudanum makes this question broader and vaguer and less sharp, which is, you suppose, the point. Sleep takes you somewhere around 3 o'clock, and this is where the story goes somewhere specific, because sleep on laudanum is a specific place. It's not nothing, it's not blank. It's a kind of sleep that has a texture, thick and slightly resistant, like moving through water, and underneath the thickness there are things that are almost dreams, but feel more real than dreams, more present, more inhabited. You dream about a room, not this room, a room that is somehow larger than it should be, with high walls and a single window, and through the window you can see a street that isn't quite any street you know, and the light through the window is the specific amber of a fire. But there's no fire, just the light. And in the room there are other women. You can't see them clearly. They're not quite people yet, or not quite the kind of people you can look at directly. But they're there, present and numerous, and each of them is lying down the way you're lying down, and each of them has the same quality of horizontal management, and the room is warm and close and completely silent. You try to speak to the nearest one and your mouth doesn't work quite right, and she turns toward you and her face is, you come back. The room, your room, the fire lower now. The light through the curtains changed, darker later, the amber of evening rather than afternoon. Your back still aches. The cramping is there, duller than before. Either the laudanum or the natural rhythm of it has brought it down from foreground to midground. You are, as Blackwood said you would be, resting. You lie still and you listen to the house. You can hear Annie somewhere below, the distant domesticity of evening preparations. James will be home in an hour. Dinner will be prepared. The house will rearrange itself around the evening rhythm, and you will be here, in this room, horizontal and managed, because you are indisposed and the indisposition requires it. There's something about this horizontal position, this specific quality of lying in a room while the world moves around you, that Victorian medicine has institutionalized with remarkable thoroughness, not just for menstrual complaints. Rest cures are everywhere in late Victorian medicine. The great neurologist Silas Weir Mitchell, American, admired in England, has developed what he calls the rest cure for women with nervous complaints. Absolute bed rest, often for weeks or months, isolation from family and activity, forced feeding, complete removal for any demanding mental or physical activity. The idea is that the nervous system, overtaxed by modern life, requires total deprivation of stimulation to recover. Mitchell's rest cures were applied to women like you, women from the middle and upper classes who showed signs of nervous exhaustion, depression, anxiety, ennui, vague physical complaints, the whole constellation of symptoms that the Victorian medical establishment filed under female nervous disorders. Those women were put to bed. Weeks, months, some of them for longer. The writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman had the rest cure. She later wrote a story about it, The Yellow Wallpaper. You haven't read it yet. It hasn't been written yet. It's still 1878, and Gilman is still 20 years old and hasn't had the rescuer herself. Hasn't written the story that will become one of the most important short stories about women's health ever produced. She'll write it in 1892, 13 years from now. You won't live to know whether it captures something true, but you might, if you thought about it in those terms, recognize the description, the wallpaper, the room, the woman staring at the ceiling, the quality of being managed into something like madness by the cure for madness. You're not in that situation. Your situation is ordinary, monthly, routine. You close your eyes again. James comes home at 6. You hear the front door, the sound of his coat being taken, his voice in the hall. Annie's voice, lower, responding. The sounds of a house receiving its husband after the working day. His footsteps on the stairs. He opens the bedroom door quietly, in the way of a man who's been told you're resting and is trying not to disturb you while also checking on you, which requires a combination of stealth and presence that produces a slightly awkward result. "Awake?" he says. "Yes." He comes in, stands by the bed. He looks at you with the expression he has when you are unwell. Concerned, yes, genuinely, but also slightly at a loss. The expression of a man who has delegated your health to Blackwood and feels that the situation is therefore under control, but is also aware that something is happening that he doesn't quite know what to do with. "How are you feeling?" "Better," you say. "The laudanum helps." "Good." He nods. He doesn't sit. This isn't a visiting the sickbed visit, not exactly. It's a checking-in visit, a brief notation that you are unwell and are being appropriately managed. "Blackwood will be back Thursday," you say. "Yes," he sent word. A pause. "I'll have supper sent up to you." "You don't need to do that. I can come downstairs." His expression shifts slightly. Blackwood was clear. Rest. No exertion. And there it is. Blackwood was clear. The prescription has been received, the instructions transmitted, and the system has now organized itself around keeping you horizontal and still and quiet for the next several days. And your own assessment of whether you're capable of navigating a staircase is not, technically, the primary data point in this calculation. "All right," you say. James nods again. He leans down and touches your forehead briefly. Not quite a kiss, more of a checking gesture, temperature by lip, and then straightens and goes back to the door. "I'll see you're not disturbed," he says. He closes the door gently behind him. You lie in the semi-dark and think about the word disturbed, and what it means in this context, and what it means in other contexts. The supper arrives on a tray at 7. Annie brings it. Thin soup, the kind Blackwood approves of, easy on the system, requiring minimal digestive effort, and bread and butter and a small cup of weak tea. It smells of nothing very strongly, as approved invalid food should. You eat it sitting up in bed, which involves a particular comedy of pillows and tray management, and it tastes of nothing very strongly, and it is warm, which is something. Annie takes the tray. She stands for a moment at the door before leaving. "Is there anything else you need, Ma'am?" "No," you say. Then, "Annie." She turns. You don't know what you're going to say. You had something, some question, some crossing of the line between you and her, some acknowledgement of the thing you were thinking about this morning, the laundry woman, the basket, what Annie does when her own body makes demands of her in the middle of a working day. But you don't have the language for it. The right kind of language for that conversation doesn't exist in 1878, not across the particular distance between you. You're the employer, she's the employee. The things that connect you, the things you have in common that you're not supposed to have in common, don't have a form here that either of you can speak in. Nothing, you say. Good night? Good night, Ma'am. She goes. The fire burns low. The room settles into its nighttime quality. Outside, London performs its version of quieting down, which is less a quieting than a shift in tone. The day noises replaced by the night noises, horses still but fewer, voices different, the distant sounds of the night economy beginning. You take the second dose of laudanum at 8, as prescribed, half a fluid drachm, the same brown bottle, the same bitter taste, the same 20 minutes, and then the slow, soft installation of the cotton wool. By 8:30, you're elsewhere. Still in the room, still aware of the room, but the edges of everything are softer. The fire is beautiful. You notice this. The specific beauty of firelight in a darkened room, the way it moves, the way it makes the shadows move in a slow counterpoint. Normally you wouldn't think much about the fire. It's a fire. It keeps the room warm. Tonight you watch it for 10 minutes without looking away. The pain is there. It's always there. But it's further back than it was. The cramping is a thing happening somewhere, registered and acknowledged, but not requiring your full attention. This is the laudanum state. This is what's been prescribed to you. A slight removal from yourself, a slight softening of the interface between your body and your awareness, and it works in the specific limited way it works. It makes the pain manageable. It makes the room bearable. It makes the next several hours achievable. What it doesn't do, what it was never designed to do, what it will never do, is address anything. Not the cause of the pain, not the physiological reality of what your body is doing, not the fact that what your body is doing is entirely normal and would be survivable with significantly less chemical intervention, if anyone were interested in developing that kind of intervention, which they are not, because the medical establishment is more interested in managing you than in understanding you. But that's a thought for another century. Tonight you're just here, warm, softened, the fire moving in the grate. You think about the dream, the room with the other women lying down. You couldn't see their faces properly, but they were there, numerous and horizontal and very quiet. Women throughout history, lying in darkened rooms. On whatever the era provides, straw mattresses, feather beds, clean linen, rough cotton, whatever. Always the room, always the dark, always the body demanding its attention and the world arranging around it. Sometimes with opium, sometimes without. Sometimes with physicians in attendance, sometimes alone. Sometimes in houses like this one, sometimes in one-room tenements, sometimes in palaces. But always the room. There's something about that thought that should be horrifying and somehow isn't tonight, in the laudanum warmth. There's something about it that feels more like company, like the particular comfort of knowing you're not the only one. You've never spoken to another woman your age about what this is like. Not really, not the actual texture of it. You've said I've been a little unwell, or it's that time again in the polite shorthand that women use with each other, the shorthand that means I know, and you know, and we won't discuss it. You've heard other women use the same shorthand. You've never, not once, had the kind of conversation that would tell you what the person behind the shorthand actually experiences. Are they like you? Is the pain the same? Is the mood shift the same? The heightening, the legibility of things normally insulated, or is everyone different? Are some of them fine, managing on nothing, going through their days without this quality of being internally notified? Or are there some who have it worse than you, who have it so badly that even Blackwood's laudanum wouldn't touch it, who have it badly enough that they're in the situation you've read about in fragments, whispered about, the women who are institutionalized for cyclical madness. You'll never know. The conversation doesn't exist. The fire dies down. The room cools slightly. You pull the coverlet up. The laudanum is doing its full work now. The ceiling is very still and very far away, and you're very comfortable in a loose, architectural way, the way of someone who has been assembled on this particular surface rather than placed on it, whose limbs are distributed at ideal angles. Sleep comes. The second day is different from the first. You know this about your own rhythms. The first day is the peak, the worst of the cramping, the most acute of the pain. The second day is the long middle. The pain has settled into something continuous and low-grade, a constant companion rather than a periodic ambush. The laudanum takes the edge off it but doesn't eliminate it. What it does eliminate is the urgency, the sense that something needs to be done about this. What the laudanum gives you is acceptance, a chemically mediated willingness to simply be here, in this room, with this body, without the need to have any other quality of experience. You wake at 7. The room is cold. The fire went out overnight and Annie hasn't yet been up to relight it. The curtains are still drawn. The street sounds have the particular quality of early morning, lighter and more sparse than later. The city not quite fully committed to its day. Your back aches. The cramping is present but distant, the polite version. You lie still for a moment and take stock, the way you always do. Then you reach for the small notebook you keep on the nightstand. This is something you do that nobody knows about. Nobody. Not James, not Blackwood, not your mother or your sister or any friend you've ever had. The notebook is small, the kind meant for household accounts, with a brown cover and pages that have grown soft with use. You've had it for 2 years. In it, you keep records, your cycle, the dates, the duration, the severity of the pain, the symptoms in the days before, the quality of the days during, the aftermath, notes on what helps and what doesn't, what makes it worse, what makes it more bearable. 2 years of meticulous private data about your own body. You started keeping it because you noticed something Blackwood had never mentioned. The pattern. Not just that it happened every month, but the specific pattern of how it happened. That the days before were different from the days during in predictable ways. That certain things in the days before, certain foods, certain stresses, poor sleep, affected the severity of what followed. That the mood shifts came before the physical symptoms with remarkable regularity, like a storm system showing up on the horizon before the rain. Blackwood doesn't know about the notebook. If he did, he would probably express mild professional amusement at you attempting to track your own condition. He might even be charmed by it, in the patronizing way of a doctor who is genuinely kind. And then he would tell you that the pattern you're observing is simply the natural course of uterine irritability, and that what you need is what he's already prescribed. He would not think of it as data. He would not think of you as capable of producing meaningful medical data about your own condition. That's not a category that exists in 1878, but you're producing it anyway, in the small brown notebook, in your own hand, in the quiet of the morning. October 12th, you write. Second day. Pain moderate, continuous, back and abdomen. Mood. A pause, the mood. The heightening has receded somewhat, pushed back by the laudanum and the particular flatness of the second day. You write, mood subdued. Probably laudanum effect. L prescribed at standard dose. You write, the pre-period clarity lasted approximately 3 days this month. Noticed. Irritation at J's pattern of reading at breakfast without speaking increased. Noticed. Frustration with B's approach to examination, specifically the quality of not asking. Noticed. Desire to finish M's letter felt very large and then disappeared. You close the notebook, put it back under the pillow. The record exists, that's all. You're not sure what it's for. You're not sure anyone will ever see it, or what they would do with it if they did. But you keep the record because the record is true, and truth kept somewhere is better than truth kept nowhere. Annie comes up at 7:30 with the coal and the fire supplies. She rebuilds the fire with her efficient, practiced movements, not looking at you, not addressing you except at the end with the standard inquiry. Will Mum be wanting breakfast in her room? Yes, you tell her. Please. Breakfast arrives at 8. The invalid version. Weak tea, toast, a soft-boiled egg. The same tray, the same china, the same arrangement. You eat sitting up in bed with a coverlet arranged around you, and the sound of James getting ready for work filtering through the wall, the splash of washing water, the brief conversation with Annie in the hall, the measured sounds of a man preparing to go out into his day. His footsteps pause outside your door, a brief knock. How are you feeling? Better, you say. The second day is always better. Good. Blackwood's note said to keep resting. I know. A pause. I'll be late this evening. The Hendersons have invited me to dinner. You know the Hendersons. You've been to the Hendersons' dinners many times. You like Mrs. Henderson, whose intelligence is very nearly embarrassing in how much it exceeds the conversations it's required to participate in. You've never said this to James. Give them my apologies, you say. Of course. Another pause. Then, I'll look in before I leave. He does. He opens the door, stands in it, surveys you in your bed with your breakfast tray with the expression that is concern, arranged very slightly more toward the reassurance end than the alarm end, which is what you want. Blackwood will be back Thursday, he says, as if repeating this is a form of help. I know, you say. He goes. The front door closes. His footsteps fade on the pavement outside. The house is yours. This is the particular texture of the second day. The house is yours. You're in it, but you're not managing it. The management of the house is being handled by Annie and Mrs. Tully the cook, both of whom know what to do and do it, and you are a conscious presence in the upstairs bedroom who requires occasional attention, but is not the organising intelligence of the day. You've handed the house over, retreated into your body and the room your body is in. And here's the strange thing about that. The thing you've never managed to articulate even to yourself fully, even in the notebook. There is a part of this that is rest in the genuine sense, not the medicalized rest, not the Blackwood prescribed absolute quiet of the nervous system, but something else. The specific rest of not being the person who is managing things, of having, for 4 days a month, no social obligations, no correspondence that can't wait, no dinners to attend, no performances of health and capability and cheerful presence required. The corset is off. You don't have to put the corset on. This is not a small thing. The corset is off for 4 days every month, and this is the only time in your life, unless you're pregnant or ill, when the corset is off during the daylight hours. You lie in your bed and you breathe full breaths, not the managed, modulated breaths of a corseted woman, but full breaths that go all the way down, that use your whole chest, that remind your body it has this capacity, and you think, this is also a kind of imprisonment, the rest that comes with illness. the freedom that comes with being unwell. The only acceptable way for you to have 4 days without social obligations is to be medically excused from them. The only acceptable way to have your corset off in the afternoon is to be convalescing. What would you do if you had these 4 days and were not labelled unwell? What would you do with 4 days in which you were simply yourself, in a room, not managing anything? You don't know. Nobody's ever proposed the experiment. The morning passes, you read. This is against Blackwood's instructions. No novel reading, he said. The nervous system needs quiet. But you read anyway, because lying here without something for your mind to do for 4 days is not possible for you, and because you've come to the conclusion, in the privacy of your own skull, that your nervous system is quite robust enough to manage Mrs. Trollope, who is what you're currently reading, and who is neither mentally taxing nor particularly exciting. You read, and the fire burns, and the street makes its noises outside, and the pain sits at its second-day level, present and continuous, and the laudanum from the morning dose keeps everything at the right temperature. Your neighbour Mrs. Gould comes at 11. This is not a surprise. Mrs. Gould lives 3 houses down, and has the particular social antenna of a woman whose purpose in life has become the maintenance of a very precise web of social connections, and when you're unwell, she comes. She's been doing this since you moved to Montague Street. She always comes with something, a book, a small jar of something from her cook, on one occasion a cutting from a plant she wanted to share. Today she comes with a book and a jar of something preserves adjacent and an expression of warm, attentive concern that is entirely genuine and contains, just under the surface, a small but unmistakable quantity of information gathering. You look pale, Mrs. Gould says. She says this every time. It seems to be her primary observation about your unwell self. I'm perfectly all right, you say. You're propped on pillows. You've put on the nice bed jacket, the one with the embroidery at the cuffs. You've arranged your hair. There's a presentation required even in the sick room, perhaps especially in the sick room. Blackwood's been, she sits in the bedside chair, yesterday afternoon. Good man Blackwood. She says this with the confident authority of someone who doesn't actually know Blackwood, but has heard his name enough times in the right contexts. The Henderson girl, you know the eldest, Eleanor, she's been seeing Dr. Farlow for her nerves. He recommended those electrical treatments. Have you heard of those? You have not heard of those. Electrical stimulation of the abdominal region, Mrs. Gould says, with the tone of someone very carefully not expressing an opinion. Eleanor says it helps tremendously. Apparently quite a fashionable approach now. Farlow uses a small device. She looks at you significantly. Very effective for nervous complaints. You look at her. She looks at you. The conversation is happening on 2 levels simultaneously. The level of what's being said and the level of what's being referred to. And both of you are perfectly aware of both levels and will not be addressing the second one directly. I'm quite comfortable with Blackwood's approach, you say. Of course. She pats your hand. I'm sure you are. He's very thorough. There's a small silence in which the word thorough hangs in the air doing mild work. I brought you this. She produces the book, a travel narrative, somewhere eastern, she explains. She heard it was marvellous, though she herself hasn't read it yet. And some quince jelly from my cook. She does a wonderful quince jelly. That's very kind. Mrs. Gould stays for 40 minutes. She tells you about her own health, which is various. She tells you about the Henderson girls' electrical treatments in slightly more detail than you strictly needed. She tells you about a forthcoming lecture at the lecture hall on the question of women's education, which she has opinions about and which she shares, the opinions being somewhat complex and somewhat contradictory, and representing the particular gymnastics of a woman who is intelligent enough to see the argument for women's education and socially positioned in a way that makes finding that argument straightforwardly comfortable somewhat difficult. You listen. You're good at listening. It's one of the things you do well, in the way that women of your position are expected to do well. Active, attentive, non-threatening listening. You've been listening to people talk about their lives since you were old enough to be brought into the parlour. After 40 minutes, Mrs. Gould leaves with another pat of your hand and a promise to look in on Thursday, which will be when Blackwood comes, and you get the impression that she is genuinely trying to be kind and also genuinely curious about what Blackwood will find, and also genuinely confident in the correctness of everything that's happening, the prescription and the rest and the management of the whole situation, because everything that's happening is what always happens, what has always happened, what is supposed to happen. She goes. The room is yours again. You pick up the travel narrative, you read 3 pages, then you put it down and pick up the notebook instead. Mrs. G visited, you write. News of electrical treatments as fashionable approach to menstrual complaints. Dr. Farlow at... She didn't say the address. Interesting. Note. Look into this. You won't look into it. You know you won't. Looking into it would require mentioning it to Blackwood, which would require explaining where you'd heard about it, which would open a conversation about Mrs. Gould and the Henderson girl and their specific medical presentations that would be uncomfortable in a variety of ways. And more fundamentally, looking into it would require positioning yourself as a person who has an active view on her own treatment, who is evaluating options, who is participating in the medical management of her own body as a subject rather than receiving it as an object. That is not a position that 1878 has a structure for. The structure that exists is Blackwood has a view on your treatment. James has delegated the management of your health to Blackwood, and your role is to take the laudanum and rest and present yourself for examination when required. You write, I wonder sometimes what I would prescribe, if prescribing were a thing I was allowed to consider doing. And then you close the notebook, because that thought is the kind of thought that has nowhere to go and pressing on it doesn't help. The 3rd day. By the 3rd day, the character of the confinement has settled into something. Not comfortable exactly, but familiar. The room has been your room for 3 years, but these 4 days every month make it more intensely your room than it ever is otherwise. You know the quality of light at every hour. You know which sounds from the street penetrate and which don't. You know the sound of Annie's footstep on the stair versus Mrs. Tully's versus James's. You know the specific creak of the 3rd step up, the sound the door makes settling in its frame. The pain has modulated again. The 3rd day usually represents a significant easing, the body beginning to complete its cycle, the worst of the work done. The cramping is intermittent now rather than continuous, arriving and departing rather than maintaining its constant presence. The backache is still there, but lower, duller, manageable. You've taken the laudanum this morning, but at a lower intensity than the past 2 days. Blackwood left room in the prescription for this. You've been calibrating dosage for long enough to know how to do it. Less laudanum means more clarity, more of yourself present. With more of yourself present, you read properly. The travel narrative turns out to be genuinely interesting. A man's journey through Persia, descriptions of landscapes and cities and people that have the quality of something real rather than performed. and you read for 2 hours without stopping, which is the most sustained reading you've done since last month. Because on ordinary days there is always something else to be done, some letter or obligation or management of the house that makes reading for 2 hours feel self-indulgent. This is the thing about the confinement that you've been circling, here, in the room, in the bed, with the pain in the background and the laudanum doing its subtle work and backwards instructions keeping you horizontal and still and removed from ordinary demands. Here, you read, you think, you write in the notebook, you look at the ceiling, and let your mind do things that your ordinary days don't give it time for. The constraint produces something. You've never said this to anyone. It sounds like... You can hear how it sounds. It sounds like gratitude for being unwell. It sounds like a woman who is glad to be confined. And you're not glad. You're not glad of the pain or the management or the laudanum or the enforced horizontalness. You're not glad of any of it. But there's something here, in the space the confinement creates, something that exists here and not elsewhere. You write in the notebook, the room makes certain thoughts possible. I don't know why, maybe because nothing else is possible, and so the mind has nowhere else to go. Is this what men get all the time? Days where the room itself gives them permission to think. Outside your window, London is having a perfectly ordinary October Thursday. You can hear it without seeing it. The horses, the voices, the particular soundscape of a city of 3.5 million people, each of them going about their specific existence, most of them doing exactly what they would do any other Thursday. Somewhere in that city right now are other women lying in darkened rooms. Not just yours. This is not a unique situation. Across every class, though the forms differ wildly, there's the woman in the great house in Mayfair who has her own Blackwood and her own laudanum, and perhaps a lady's companion to sit with her and read aloud. There's the woman in the respectable but less grand house, like yours, who has the sick room and the tray and the management but is alone in it, managing her own management. There's the woman in the cramped lodgings above a shop in Cheapside who has a hot water bottle if she's lucky, and a day off if her landlady is sympathetic, and a penny for a small bottle of laudanum from the pharmacy on the corner if she has a penny, which she may or may not. And there's the woman who has none of it. The woman in the most crowded street of the most crowded part of the city. Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, Southwark, who is having exactly the same physiological experience as you, the same cramping and the same back pain and the same mood and the same exhaustion, and who is also at work, in a factory possibly, in someone else's kitchen, on the street with a basket or a cart, moving through it because not moving through it is not an option. There are factory regulations that technically allow women to take breaks during menstruation. Technically. In practice, the regulations are honoured in the way that many regulations in 1878 are honoured, which is to say, insufficiently and inconsistently, and with considerable attention to what the foreman thinks about it on any given day. Women in mills and factories who need to leave the floor for any reason risk losing their jobs, or losing pay, or losing the goodwill of supervisors whose goodwill is required for basic working conditions. So they stay, and they work, and they manage it privately, inside the continuous motion of a working day, the way they've always managed it since they were 14. Their experience is not documented. There's no medical literature about them. The medical literature is about women of your class, because women of your class are the ones who can access doctors, and doctors write about what they see. The factory girl's cramps are not in any journal. The domestic servant's experience of her monthly cycle is not a subject of medical inquiry. They're invisible in the literature the way they're invisible in most things. Annie. You think about Annie again. You ring the bell. She comes, quickly as always, her footstep light on the stairs. "Ma'am." "I wonder," you say, and then you pause because you're not entirely sure how to say the thing you want to say. "I wonder if there's anything you need. If there's any time you need for anything. Any particular difficulty in managing your work." You can hear how this sounds. Vague and uncomfortable and not quite saying what it's trying to say. Annie's face is its usual careful neutral. She's 16 years old and she's excellent at this, at the particular expressional stillness of someone who receives information through the walls between employer and employee and processes it entirely internally. "No, ma'am," she says. "Thank you, ma'am. If there were anything," you try again, "any days when you found the work more difficult, I would understand." A pause, very brief. That's very kind, ma'am," Annie says. "I'll remember." She means, "Thank you for gesturing towards something neither of us is going to name." She means, "I understand what you're saying and I appreciate the intention, even though the structure that would let you actually help doesn't exist in this house or in this era." She means, "I'll be fine." Or she means simply, "Thank you, ma'am. I'll remember." And you're reading too much into it. Either way, she goes back downstairs and you lie in your room, and outside the world continues. Blackwood comes on Thursday as promised. He is satisfied. The crisis has passed. His word, crisis, and you're responding well to the treatment. He adjusts the prescription slightly downward for the remaining days. He asks about sleep, about appetite, about the pain levels. He checks your pulse. He looks at your tongue. He presses on your abdomen through your dressing gown and the layers underneath it, and pronounces everything acceptable. "You should be quite recovered by the weekend," he says. "I'd suggest continuing the rest until Saturday. No social engagements before Sunday at the earliest." He says this as if he's releasing you into parole, which in some sense he is. "Of course," you say. "The laudanum seems to have agreed with you this month. No excessive sedation, no morning confusion." "No," you say. "Everything as usual." This is true, and also not quite true. There was the dream on the first day. The room with the women. You haven't told him about that. It wasn't nothing. It was the laudanum making something. The opium opening something. The way it does. The way it reaches into the things you keep very well organized and closed and shows you the organizing itself. But that's not a medical symptom. That's not something Blackwood has a prescription for. Good. He snaps his bag closed. "I'll see you in the ordinary course of things next month then, unless Mr. Hartley has reason to send for me earlier." He says his goodbyes. He goes. You hear him speaking with James in the hall. James has come home early today, specifically to be present for Blackwood's visit, a gesture that you appreciate without entirely being able to say why. And then the front door, and then James coming up the stairs. He looks at you with the good news face, the everything under control face. "Blackwood's pleased," he says. "You've done well. You've done well. You've been lying in a room for 4 days taking prescribed opium, and you have done well." "I'm glad," you say. He sits on the edge of the bed. This is unusual. He doesn't usually sit on the bed. He sits in the chair normally, but today he sits on the edge of the bed in a gesture that is almost, you watch him, almost something other than the usual management of the situation. Almost something that wants to touch the actual thing. "These are difficult for you," he says. "I know." "They're manageable," you say. Still, he looks at his hands, then at you. I wonder sometimes if there's more we should be doing. Blackwood seems confident, but I read something in the Times last week. There's a letter from a physician who argues that the approach with rest and the laudanum is outdated, that there are better approaches now. You look at him. This is unexpected. What did he suggest? Exercise, believe it or not. Light exercise, regular, walking, cycling if one can manage it. Some business about blood circulation. He shakes his head slightly. I don't know. Sounds rather against Blackwood's thinking, but I thought, I don't know. He stops. He's looking at you with something that is close to asking you a question, though the question isn't quite formed yet. Asking you specifically as the person this is happening to, whether you have a view on the management of the thing happening to you. You should say, Blackwood knows best. You should say, I trust his approach. You should say the thing that closes this conversation and returns it to the proper structure. Instead, you say, I do find the walking helps. Before, in the days before, the walks in the park. Blackwood said you'd been going out, James says slowly. Short walks, half an hour. The fresh air helps with the headaches. A pause. He's processing this. The walks you've been taking, which are not against anyone's rules exactly, but which Blackwood would probably not have recommended if asked, and which help measurably in ways that are not captured by any of the medical literature Blackwood has read. I'll mention it to him, James says finally, the next time, that you find the walking helps. All right, you say. He stands. He does the almost but not quite a real kiss thing to your forehead. He goes to get ready for dinner. You lie in the cooling room and think about this conversation, which is a different kind of conversation than the ones you usually have with James, which contained a slightly different quality of looking at you. You think about whether this is something, some small shift, or whether it's nothing, just a variation in the ordinary texture of things. You can't tell. It might be nothing. But it might be the beginning of something that doesn't have a name yet. Saturday. Blackwood's instruction is Saturday at the earliest before social engagements. And he means evening social engagements. Dinners, that kind of thing. He doesn't mean Saturday morning walks. You get dressed. Properly dressed, corset and all. Though the corset goes on with slightly more deliberation than usual, the bones finding their positions against a body that has spent 4 days in a different configuration. Annie does the laces with her usual competence. You put on the blue wool dress because October, and because the blue dress is your most comfortable proper dress, the one whose waist sits in the right place. You go downstairs. The parlour smells like the house again. The coal and the beeswax and the faint ghost of yesterday's fire. And it's all familiar and ordinary in the way that everything is ordinary, after the specific compressed intensity of the room upstairs. The writing desk. Margaret's letter, still unfinished. The chair by the window where you sat 4 days ago and watched the laundry woman with her basket. You sit at the writing desk. You take out paper. Dearest Meg, you write. Forgive the delay. I've been a little unwell. The usual business. Nothing serious. You absolutely should accept Mrs. Parkinson's invitation. You write for 20 minutes. The letter about Margaret's social dilemma, your opinions on it, some news about London, a question about the children, a brief reference to something funny that Mrs. Gould said. Normal correspondence, the kind you produce 40 weeks a year without difficulty. Then you reach for the smaller notebook, the brown one with the soft pages. You write at the bottom of Thursday's entry, out of bed Saturday. Pain gone, backache residual. Mood, what would I call it? Clear. The usual insulation back but thinner than ordinary. The week leaves something. don't know what to call it. You sit for a moment with the pen in your hand, then you write, next month. Try less laudanum on the third day. See what it's like clear. Note what is actually happening. This is data. This is not being managed. This is managing. You close the notebook. You put it in the desk drawer. Outside, the street is doing its Saturday morning things. A woman with a basket. Not the same woman. A different woman. All the women with baskets blur together in your vision of this street, of this city, of this era. Moves quickly along the pavement. A dog is investigating the usual gutter. The pigeon is back on the windowsill across the way, working on something. You get your coat. You tell Annie you're going for a walk. She hands you your gloves with the expression of someone who's not going to say anything about the expression she's not having. You walk. The park is 4 streets away. The park is the park you've been walking in for 3 years, whose paths you know, whose trees are just starting their autumn change, the leaves going amber and russet at the edges. The morning is cold enough for your breath to show, a thin, brief cloud vanishing. The coat is good and thick and your feet are warm, and there's nobody around this corner of the park except an older man walking a very slow, very dignified large dog. You walk the full perimeter, 40 minutes. Your back aches mildly, the residual of the week. The air is London air, coal and cold and something organic from the park. The particular smell of leaf mould and damp earth that comes in October, when the city and the season intersect in exactly this way. You breathe it in, full breaths, uncorseted breaths. Well, corseted, but after 4 days without it, you're aware of the corset in a different way than usual, aware of the constraint as constraint rather than simply as the normal architecture of being dressed. You walk. At the far corner of the park, where the path comes closest to the iron railing, and you can see through to the street beyond, you stop for a moment. The street beyond is busy. Ordinary Saturday morning busy. There's a cart. There's a woman with a basket. There's a boy running somewhere. There are houses with their windows presenting the usual domestic interiors. A woman at a desk in one window writing. A man reading in another. All of them having their October Saturday. All of them inside their specific circumstances. Their bodies doing what bodies do, their weeks having been what their weeks were, and none of them visible to each other in any but the most surface-level way. You think about the notebook in the desk drawer. 2 years of records. A private archive of a private experience. 2 years of something being tracked that isn't being tracked anywhere else, in any journal, in any medical record, by any physician. And the thought arrives, not for the first time, but with more weight than usual. What you know about your body. The pattern, the rhythm, what helps and what doesn't. What the days before feel like, and what the days after feel like, and what the specific quality of the pain is and how it varies and why. What you know is more than anyone else knows, more than Blackwood knows, more than James knows, more than the medical literature knows, in its confident, wrong, categorical way. You know, you've been keeping track. It's not a radical thought. Not in 1878. Or rather, it is a radical thought in 1878, though you don't quite know how to call it that. The idea that you, the woman, are the primary authority on your own body, that the information you carry is more valuable than the information your doctor carries, that management should flow from your knowledge rather than toward your compliance. That's a thought that has no proper home in this era. It's a thought that has to live in a small notebook with a brown cover, in a desk drawer, in a house in Bloomsbury, in 1878. But it's there. The thought is there. You turn around and walk back the way you came. The 4th day, in the evening. James has asked if you feel well enough for dinner downstairs, and you have said yes, genuinely, because you are genuinely well enough. The worst is 4 days behind you. You're yourself again, or close to it. The particular post-confinement version of yourself that's slightly quieter than usual and slightly more aware of things. Dinner is roast lamb and potatoes and something with carrots that Mrs. Tully has done well, and the wine is red and good, and you and James sit at the long table that seats 8 with the candles lit between you and eat and talk in the way you usually talk, which is about his work and the news and the Hendersons and various things that are not the thing that has occupied your last 4 days. He tells you about a meeting he attended with a group of investors considering a railway project in South Africa. You listen. You ask reasonable questions. You are present and engaged in the way a wife is present and engaged over dinner. This is something you do well. Toward the end of the meal, he says, "I did speak to Blackwood about the walking." You look at him. He said, James pauses carefully, he said that light exercise in the week prior to the indisposition might be acceptable. He still recommends rest during, but the week prior, he's willing to concede the point. A concession. Blackwood has conceded a point. "I see," you say. "I told him you'd found it helpful. The walking." James refolds his napkin. "He said he'd note it." He'd note it. It will go in Blackwood's notes. Your experience, your private, unasked for observation, the thing you've known for 2 years, will be recorded in Blackwood's notes as a piece of medical information, as if it has just now, having passed through the proper channels, become real. You could be irritated by this. You're not quite. It's not quite irritation what you feel. It's something more complex. A gratitude that the thing is being noted, and a mild objection to the structure that required it to go through Blackwood to become notable. "Good," you say. "He's a good doctor," James says. "He just needed..." He stops. "He just needed the information," you say. James looks at you for a moment. Then, "Yes." You drink your wine. After dinner you sit in the parlour by the fire that has been maintained perfectly all week, the fire that always burns, the fire that Annie feeds and tends and manages as part of the management of this house. And you read the travel narrative from Mrs. Gould that you've been making your way through, and the man's journey through Persia continues to be interesting, and outside Montague Street does its evening things. James is in his chair across from you, reading something from the city, something about finance. He's very occasionally making small sounds of either approval or disapproval at whatever he's reading. The room is warm. The fire pops. You read 2 pages and then stop. Not because the book isn't good, because you're thinking. You're thinking about the next month. 3 weeks from now, roughly, it will begin again. The first signs, the particular quality of the days before, the heightening, the legibility of things, the prescription, the room, the tray, the laudanum, the whole machinery of it. And you think, the notebook, the walks, the concession from Blackwood that has been passed through the proper channels and recorded in his notes, the small things that you've assembled in the last 2 years in the private archive of your own experience. They're not enough. They're not nearly enough. The whole structure is still intact. Blackwood is still the authority. James is still the intermediary. The room is still the designated space for your monthly existence. The laudanum is still the prescribed management. And none of that is going to change this month, or probably for many months, or possibly ever in your lifetime. But the notebook is there. The small observations are there. The specific knowledge that you are the person who knows most about what's happening in your body, that's there, even if it has no structure to belong to yet. There are women, you've heard, at the edges of things, at the edges of conversations that politely don't include you, who are arguing that this should be different. Women at the fringes of the suffrage movement, at the edges of the women's college argument, who are saying very different things about female bodies and female intelligence and female authority. Their voices are not loud yet. Not in your world. They're there, somewhere in the city, in halls and drawing rooms that aren't yours, saying things that don't have a proper audience yet. But they're there. The fire pops again. James turns a page. You open the book and read on. 6 weeks later, there's a note on the writing desk. Your hand. Made last week, in the days before. It says, "What if I tried one day without the laudanum?" And below it, 3 days later, I tried one day without the laudanum. Day 2, the intermediate day. I worked through it. The pain was bad, but I was there in it. I was not observing it from a distance. I was in it, and I worked through it, and I wrote for 2 hours in the afternoon in the notebook, and what I wrote was clearer than anything I've written in months. And below that, this is not an argument against laudanum for the bad days, but it's an argument that I have been too far from myself. That's all it says. The entry after it. Blackwood came today. I told him I'd taken one day at reduced dosage. He was not pleased. He said the nervous system requires consistency. He said I was risking a relapse. He said he would note it in his records. I said, I found it helpful. He said, Mrs. Hartley, I understand that you feel strongly, but the management of your condition requires professional guidance. I said, of course. And then I came upstairs and I wrote this. I'm 24 years old and I've been keeping records for 2 years. And I know my body better than the man who charges 2 guineas to press on it through a corset. And there is absolutely no structure in the world I currently inhabit through which this fact can become useful to anyone. But I'm keeping the records anyway. And then there's this note at the very bottom of the page, in smaller letters, as if it was an afterthought. One day it will matter that someone kept track. Let me tell you about the world outside your room. Not your world. The world past the edge of your Bloomsbury respectability, past the gas lamps of your park, past the edge of the city your prescriptions and your husband's income allow you to inhabit. Let me tell you about Whitechapel in October 1878. Not the Whitechapel of 20 years ago that will become famous for something darker. Not that year yet. Not those events. This Whitechapel, the ordinary one, the one that simply exists, Tuesday and Thursday in October, with its particular quality of density. Its streets of people living at a proximity that your street doesn't have. Its courts and alleys, and the rookeries that still exist in 1878, the great overcrowded tenements where families live in single rooms, sometimes multiple families in single rooms, sometimes with the pig in the room as well, practically speaking. In Whitechapel, in October 1878, a woman named Mary, let's call her Mary, it's a common enough name for the time and place, is 22 years old and works at a match factory in Bow Road. She works 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, making matches. The process involves phosphorus, which is currently doing something to the bones of her jaw that nobody has connected yet to the matches or to the factory. The connection will be made in 7 years. There will be strikes and newspaper articles and eventually the introduction of safety matches. But right now she doesn't know about that. She knows her face aches sometimes. She doesn't know why. She lives in one room on Vine Street with her mother and her younger sister, and her mother's boarder, a man named Connolly, who works at the docks and keeps irregular hours. The room is small, the bed is shared. Privacy is a concept from a different geography. Mary's monthly cycle comes and goes in the continuous motion of her working days. She feels it, the cramping, the back pain, the mood. But feeling it and stopping are different things, and stopping is not a thing she does. There are days when the cramping is bad enough that she holds on to the edge of the work table and breathes carefully, and the woman next to her, also named Mary, with whom she has worked side by side for 3 years, hands her a piece of brown paper folded small that has been soaked in vinegar and dried, which is what you press against the lower abdomen when the cramps are bad, because that's what you do. Because that's what your mother told you, and what her mother told her. The vinegar paper doesn't work very well. Mary knows this. She uses it anyway. She doesn't have laudanum. She can't afford laudanum. She can afford, on a particular bad day, a penny's worth of gin from the gin shop around the corner, which addresses the pain in the same general direction as laudanum, dulling the edge, installing a small amount of distance, but less effectively and more unpredictably, and with consequences for the next morning that laudanum doesn't have. She does this occasionally, not every month. On the months when the cramps are bad enough that the vinegar paper isn't doing anything, and she still has 8 hours in front of her. She doesn't have a doctor. She's never been to a doctor. There are doctors who work at a reduced rate in the mission houses and the charitable dispensaries, and she's been to one of these once for something else, a bad cough in the winter of last year, and the doctor was tired and busy and correct in his manner, and he gave her a bottle of something that helped. But for this, for the monthly thing, she has never gone. It would not occur to her to go. This is not a medical event in her world. It's just something that happens, something you manage privately, inside the continuous motion of the working day. There is no rescue for Mary. There is no bedroom in which to be confined. The room on Vine Street is the room where she lives, where everyone in her life also lives, and lying in it horizontal for 4 days while the management of the household is delegated to staff is a scene from a novel set in a world she doesn't inhabit. And yet, and here's the thing that neither of you would know how to say to the other, across the particular distance between you, across the 3 miles and the several worlds that lie between Montague Street and Vine Street, and yet Mary is moving through this. Her body is doing exactly the same thing your body does. The cramping, the pain, the mood, the exhaustion. She's not in a better situation than you just because she doesn't have the bedroom. She's in a worse situation. The moving through is harder without rest. The pain accumulates, the exhaustion accumulates. Moving through it under your own power, without the laudanum or the room, is not noble or superior. It's just all she has. But she is the one with the direct experience. She is the one who is not insulated from it. She is the one who knows, not in a notebook, not in an organized archive, but in the continuous embodied knowing of a woman who has never had the option of not knowing exactly what it feels like, in complete high definition. You, in your room, have been managing this for 10 years through a medical system that keeps you at a remove from your own body. Mary has been doing it through pure presence for the same 10 years. Neither of you has the full picture. Neither of you has the language for it yet. The language is coming. 50 years from now, in 1931, a physician named Robert Frank will publish a paper describing what he calls premenstrual tension. The first clinical description of the collection of symptoms that happen in the days before menstruation. He'll describe the mood changes, the physical discomfort, the way it resolves when menstruation begins. He'll describe it as a real clinical phenomenon worthy of study. His patients will have been women of your class, women with access to doctors, women who could communicate in the language medicine was willing to hear. But it'll be a start, a name. The name will matter. Once it has a name, it can be studied. And once it's studied, it can become something other than evidence of an inherently defective female constitution. And eventually, much further down the line, it can become understood as a normal variation in a normal process that affects women in varying degrees for entirely physiological reasons that have nothing to do with moral character or nervous temperament or the competitive demands of the uterus and the brain for the body's limited blood supply. None of that is available to you. What you have is the notebook. What Mary has is the vinegar paper and the continuity. What the medical establishment has is laudanum and confidence and the absolute certainty that what is being managed is a disorder rather than a process, a defect rather than a feature, a thing to be corrected rather than understood. The world is wrong about this. Specifically and confidently and with the best intentions, the world is wrong. But the world is always wrong about something. The distance between wrong and right is just a matter of how long it takes to cross. Now it's night. Your room, your night. Not the first night of confinement. Some night, in the long middle of a life in 1878, a night that could be any night, that has the quality of all the nights of your life gathered together in one place. The fire is low. The candle on the nightstand has about an hour left. The curtains are drawn against the London dark, which isn't real dark. You can see the orange seam of gaslight along the bottom, the light that never quite goes away. You've taken the laudanum, the lower dose you've been negotiating with yourself, not quite against Blackwood's instructions, not quite with them. The dose that leaves you softened but not gone, present but not sharp. The pain is there. Third day's version of itself, intermittent, dulled, a visitor rather than an occupant. You're in bed with the brown notebook open on the coverlet. The pen is in your hand. The page in front of you is the one that will be the last page of this month's record. You've written October complete, 12 days tracked, 6 days pre-onset, 4 days active, 2 recovery. And then you stop writing and you just lie there. The house breathes around you. James is asleep on his side of the room. The man can fall asleep with the decisiveness of someone who has never found sleep complicated, and his breathing is slow and regular and very slightly impressive in its consistency. Outside, London persists. You know what's out there. You've been listening to it for 4 days. The night watermen on the river. The link boys with their pitch torches navigating the dark courts and alleys. The gin shops never closed. The all-night baker 2 streets away whose bread smell reaches you sometimes just before dawn. The particular London night. Not quiet. Not truly quiet. But different. A lower register than the day. The city conversing with itself in a different mode. You think about all the women out there who are also navigating this particular point in their cycles. Some of them in rooms like yours, some of them in nothing like rooms like yours. And the number of them is staggering if you let yourself think about it. Half the population of London is women. Of that half, a certain percentage are in the relevant years. Of that percentage, this week right now, a significant number are where you are in the cycle, in the particular geography of pain and management and getting through it. thousands of women, tens of thousands across the city, each of them doing this privately in whatever form their circumstances allow, each of them keeping their own version of the record, in their bodies, if not in notebooks, in the embodied knowledge of what this feels like, how it comes, how it goes, what helps and what doesn't. The knowledge is there, distributed across tens of thousands of bodies, just, unrecorded, unasked for, living in private. The thought does something to the ceiling when you're looking at it on laudanum. The ceiling becomes not different, but more visible, more present. You're aware of the ceiling as an actual surface in an actual room in an actual world at a specific point in time, and the world contains you and also tens of thousands of others, and you're all doing this together and separately and without any of the language that would let you do it together. Someday, you think. Not today. Not in your lifetime, maybe. But someday someone will ask. Someone will design the study, collect the data, put the notebooks together, and the knowledge that's been living in women's bodies for all of human history will finally become something the world is willing to call knowledge. You'll be long gone by then. But the knowing will have been here. In you. In Mary. In all of them. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just waiting to be asked. The candle on the nightstand gutters. Not quite done yet, but working on it. Casting the particular dancing light of a candle near its end, the light that moves too much and makes the shadows animate. You write, in the notebook, October, complete. Moving now into the recovery. Back to the ordinary insulation, the usual distance reinstalled. And, note for next month, try the walking earlier, 2 weeks before, not one. Note what happens, and the knowledge is here. It's here whether or not anyone is recording it, and I am recording it. You close the notebook. The candle has about 40 minutes. You'll read until it goes, or you won't. Your eyes are heavy. The laudanum and the warmth and the particular deep tiredness of a body that has spent 4 days doing its monthly work are conspiring. The way they always conspire on this night, the night the worst of it is over, when you can finally stop managing and start sleeping. James breathes beside you. The fire makes small sounds. The orange line under the curtain persists. There's a church bell somewhere. You've never quite tracked which one. There are so many in London. You can always hear at least 2 or 3. They overlap, they layer, they create a texture of time that's continuous and slightly redundant. Always another bell, always another hour being announced somewhere. This bell is marking 11. You've been in this room for 4 days. In 4 days you've moved approximately 30 feet total. Bed to window to chamber pot to bed to chair to bed again. The small orbit of confinement. You've read a significant portion of a travel narrative set in Persia. You've written 4 pages in the notebook. You've had 2 conversations with Blackwood, 6 with Annie, 3 with Mrs. Gould, approximately 20 with James. You've been managed. You've been horizontal. You've been medicated and monitored and maintained. And you've also, in the small private space of the notebook and the walking and the observation, been doing something else. Something that doesn't have a name yet in 1878. Something that is, in its way, research. One day, not today, not soon, but one day someone will close the distance between the room and the knowledge. The candle goes out. Dark. The orange line. James's breathing. Your own breathing, full and slow, using the space the unlaced corset allows. The laudanum is doing its soft final work. The last of this month's doses. The cotton wool in its most comfortable form. You close your eyes. And here is the thing about sleep. The particular sleep that comes on this night. The fourth day, when the body is completing its cycle, and the medicine is wearing slowly off, and the room is warm, and the world is present but distant. This sleep is deep, deeper than the laudanum sleep of the first day, which had its own particular quality of removed observation. This sleep is different. This sleep is the sleep of a body that has done what it needed to do, and is now, finally, resting in the actual sense. Not managed rest, real rest. You go under quickly. The dreams are quiet tonight. No room full of women, no uncertain faces, just the ordinary texture of deep sleep, the kind where the self reduces to something simple and warm and not quite conscious, where the boundary between you and the bed and the room and the night all becomes a single continuous thing, and outside London makes its sounds. The bell strikes midnight, and then 1, and then 2, the hours layering on each other the way they always have, the way they did before you were born and will after, the city marking its own continuous time with these bells that have been ringing across these rooftops since before your grandparents' grandparents walked these streets. And somewhere across the city, Mary is sleeping too, in her room on Vine Street, the vinegar paper exhausted and discarded, the worst of her month also behind her, the sleep of exhaustion and completion, and tomorrow being a different day from today, taking her down into the same deep place that's taking you. Both of you sleeping, both of you warm, both of you the business of this month's body done, and above you the city and the century. 3.5 million people in their various beds and rooms and doorways and courts and alleys, sleeping or not sleeping, the vast humming machinery of London at rest and at work simultaneously, as it always is, as it always will be. Centuries will pass, the city you know will change until it's unrecognizable, and then change again. The gas lamps will become electric lights, and the electric lights will become the glow that now means city wherever you can see it in the night sky, a permanent amber against the dark. The horses will become cars, and the cars will fill the streets where the horses were. The corsets will go, the laudanum will go, or rather will become something controlled and categorized and no longer prescribed for what your body does every month. The month will go on. The body will go on. Women will go on waking in darkened rooms with familiar pain, taking stock, negotiating with their days. And someone, many someones actually over many years, will finally ask them what it's like, will design the studies, will read the notebooks, so to speak, the ones kept in bodies and the ones kept in careful private handwriting. Will take the knowledge that has been distributed across half the human race for all of human history and start, finally, to write it down in the form that the world has been willing to call knowledge all along. It will take longer than it should. That's always true. But the knowledge will be there waiting, the way it's always been there waiting, in the rooms and the bodies and the notebooks and the vinegar paper and the private quiet of women who knew what they knew and kept track. Some things don't change. The body's cycle doesn't change. The knowledge in the body doesn't change. What changes is whether anyone bothers to ask. Let sleep take you the way it took the woman in Bloomsbury in her room on Montague Street in the autumn of 1878. Let the room go dark. Let the medicine wear thin and the real rest come in. Let your hands relax on the coverlet, your breathing slow, the particular held quality of your daytime self finally, fully, release. You've done this before. You'll do it again. You know how. The bell somewhere in London strikes 3. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have the notebook. You have the records. You have the knowledge of your own body, even if nobody has asked yet. That's more than nothing. That's enough. Let sleep take you. Let the city dream. Let the room hold you the way it always holds you, familiar and imperfect and yours. Let tomorrow be different. Let rest be real. Good night.